Panic of 1893 was a tragic event that set the United States back for years and negatively affected the country in a multitude of ways. The crisis was sparked by the collapse of two of the United States' major employers, the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad and the National Portage Company. The Philadelphia and Reading Railroad was one of the nation's first railroad companies. It was originally created to transport anthracite coal from mines in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania to Philadelphia. The National Portage Company was a business that was established in 1887 and was the nation's leading manufacturer of rope and twine. After these companies failed, the stock market almost immediately crashed. This caused banks to recall many of the loans that they lent to businesses, resulting in the failure of many of these businesses. The main type of businesses that fell into bankruptcy due to the Panic of 1893 include banks, railroads, and steel mills. There were many other consequences of the Panic of 1893. One prominent consequence is that unemployment rates skyrocketed to around 25%. Also, another consequence is that the rate of homelessness increased, as thousands of workers were laid off and could not pay their mortgages or rent. United States citizens panicked following the event, in fear that they would not have enough money to support their family. Starvation was a legitimate concern for families during this time period, because most people could not afford food. On top of this, the government paid little attention to the financial crisis. This severely angered citizens of the United States, especially Jacob Coxey, an Ohio businessman. In an attempt to get the government to notice the economic struggle of the nation, Coxey organized a protest that involved marching to Washington, D.C. Ultimately, the march was rather unsuccessful. Coxey and other leaders of the march were arrested by local police, and only about 600 members of the march actually reached Washington, D.C. Furthermore, the government still refused to recognize the situation. Coxey's army was not the only significant riot that occurred during the financial crisis. Another major uprising that occurred during this period was the Pullman strike. George Pullman was a 19th century businessman that dominated the railroad industry. Only few businessmen saw as much success that Pullman experienced. The 1880s was an era of prosperity for the Pullman business, and the demand for the railroad business was very high. Things took a change for the worse when the Panic of 1893 struck. The railroad industry hit an all-time low, as thousands of men were forced out of work and prices collapsed. Pullman's business was severely crippled by the panic, leaving Pullman greatly concerned about his company. Trying to save his business, Pullman laid off approximately a third of his company members and cut wages by a large amount. This frustrated his workers, as they felt that this was very unfair. On May 11, 1894, a group of Pullman's workers went on strike. At first, the strike was not noticed and received little support. This changed when the Pullman workers appealed their case to the American Railroad Union. Eugene Debs, the leader of this union, supported the Pullman workers' case, and many other railroad unions began giving support to the case as well. The case gained so much support that on June 26th, workers stopped moving trains that had Pullman's cars. On July 2nd, a court injunction was issued upon the strike. The strike continued for a little while longer, but the American Railroad Union eventually had no other choice but to end the strike. Clearly, the financial crisis had a lasting effect on many businesses. The Panic of 1893 also had a very important impact on the election of 1896 and the formation of the Populist Party. The Populist Party was a political movement consisting of farmers who opposed industrialists. Quickly, the state of the nation's economy became the focus of the presidential election of 1896. The Populist Party held the belief that eliminating the gold standard would completely fix the economy. They thought that the gold standard benefited industrial workers more than farmers because the high value of money made it very difficult for farmers to pay back loans. In 1896, the Populist Party merged with the Democratic Party. William Jennings Bryan was the candidate for the Democratic Party, while William McKinley was the candidate for the Republicans. While the Democrats and Populists believed that the gold standard needed to be abolished, McKinley and the Republicans endorsed it. McKinley eventually won this election, and the gold standard was still upheld. The nation finally began to overcome the struggles of the Panic of 1893 by 1897. It is evident that the financial crisis left the United States with several long-lasting hardships, as it took the nation nearly 5 years to begin recovering from its effects.
This can't be happening.
What is it?
The stock market, it's crashing. It crashed.
How could that be?
The Philadelphia and the Reading Railroad, the National Portage Company, all the businesses, they're all going down. They're crashing. What do we do? We don't even have money for food. What should we do?
We can ask the bank for a loan.
The banks have folded. They're not giving out loans anymore.